camera on.
Yes,
Okay.
with the camera on. Yes, but you're looking good, so you have nothing to worry about. Okay, so this is Pushing Boundaries, a podcast about pioneering research, breakthrough discoveries, and unconventional ideas. I'm your host, Dr. Thomas R. Burney. My guest today is Andria Spyridou PhD, Doctor Natural Science. She received her doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Konstanz, Germany. Dr. Spyridou is presently the Regional Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Coordinator for UNICEF's Latin America and Caribbean Regional Office. Have I done you right by now?
Perfect. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Dr. Burney.
Just feel, Thomas is fine. Just feel comfortable to, interject anymore. I just have a few more words to say. She will discuss with me how conflict shapes birth experience, child development, and parenting, and what is the role of the international academic community. UNICEF in 2018 estimated that more than 29 million babies in 2018 were born in conflict zones, such as Afghanistan, South Sudan, Syria, and Yemen, or on perilous journeys to escape fighting. Welcome, Andria.
Thank you, Thomas. Nice to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. I'm interested in your experiences starting in 2016, when you decided to join an international humanitarian organization in response to the refugee crisis, I believe it was in Greece, as a psychosocial support coordinator. Perhaps we can start by you telling me, what is a psychosocial support coordinator? It's a big word.
I know it's a big word, and it's actually a mental health psychosocial support coordinator, which is a term that is being used a lot since 2007.
Yes.
The International Standing Committee for Mental Health decided that this is the right term to use when it comes to responding to mental health needs within emergency settings in conflict or natural disasters.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually responds to, the different levels of support that people need to receive when they are in these situations. Because, we use what is called the I Ask pyramid from the initials of the Interagency Standing Committee. And this pyramid is very similar to the public health pyramid, where you have at the first level all the basic needs and need for security that all people affected by any type of emergency have. Then on the second level, you have a smaller group of people that might need more specific support, always within the psychosocial spectrum of support. Then on the third level, we're talking about more targeted, vulnerable groups in the community that would require more specialized support. And here we are talking about psychological interventions. We're talking about psychological first aid, or people that require, let's say, interventions that are linked to a certain disability or whatever their condition requires more focused support. And then on the top of the pyramid, we have that smaller number of people that would require really specialized services. And then we're talking about psychiatric services, medical services linked to mental health. And then you would require also to have those professionals that are specialized, like psychiatrists or mental health professionals that are trained to respond to those needs. So
okay, can I just stop you for a second? Can I stop you? That makes perfect sense, of course. But where are these people going to come from? I mean, if you are looking, for example, at Afghanistan or South Sudan or Syria or Yemen or the war in Ukraine right now, all those people that you're talking about who are necessary are just simply not available.
Well, that's true, and that's why all the humanitarian aid has been developed for decades, for centuries, or at least at the start of the 19th century, when we had, the UN coming in, the International Red Cross coming in. That's what conflict and natural disasters do. It impacts directly the infrastructures of a country and the basic services that need to be present, especially in times of need. And that's why there are all these organizations that are already responding from the very beginning. There are also national organizations. So the national societies of the Red Cross are present in 192 countries, and their role there is to respond in these kind of situations. The problem is that when a conflict like in Ukraine or Syria or many other parts of the world breaks, then you have a lot of destruction of the services and a lot of people fleeing. So this makes the needs, the already growing needs of the people, makes the response more urgent. And that's why within this mental health and psychosocial support response, we already have taken into consideration that the community has a role to play. And that's why we always look to find the existing capacities that the communities have to respond to crises. And we take, the resources within a community to train people that might be volunteers or teachers or nurses that might not have any capacity to respond to a psychosocial need. With a little bit of training, they could do that. So, for example, psychological first aid is a very good example, because we can train in PFA community members in less than a day, in even 3-4 hours, on how they can respond to those basic needs, because it's a first response. So yeah, it's not ideal, but in terms of responding to immediate needs, we can and should always take into account the available resources in the community.
In which part of the world, of all the places you have been to, where has it been most effective? Where has this approach really worked well?
Well, it's a bit difficult to say, because my experience has been very different depending on the country. Yeah, for example, in Syria, no, let me start from Greece, because in Greece it was really I've seen with my own eyes people, volunteers, elderly people, grandmothers being trained in how to provide PFA in 2 hours, and then you would have the boats with the refugees coming in the islands, with people that they have already suffered a lot to leave their country, but also they have been at risk of death in the journey in the boat. And some of them arriving that in a boat you could have children who had died, mothers who lost their children on the way. So we're talking about really urgent needs of people that are coming in with a lot of psychological distress. And you would see these grandmothers that have received this information on how to do PFA. They've received basic information of where services are available, to whom they need to refer if someone comes in and they need medical attention, for example. They've been told, when the people come in, offer them water and a safe place to sit. So they would do this great, and they would be really effective, because it's more or less things that are innate in us. We are as human beings, as empathic human beings, we are already predisposed to treat people in that way. So it just needs they just needed a bit of information and structure on how they should do this response, and they were doing it amazingly. So that really worked well. And then in my experience in Syria, where it was a protracted conflict, where you had really long-term impact of the conflict, which meant mothers and separated from their husbands, and therefore losing all the protection system. Economical independency was not there. They had to raise their children. Children were out of school. So all the needs were exacerbated by the time and by the displacement.
Yeah.
So in these cases, PFA is not enough. In these cases, you need to, unfortunately, rebuild the services, rebuild the structures that are needed to respond to the multiple needs that have been created. And when we talk about children, especially children out of school for years, or children that have never been in the education system, the developmental milestones are not reached, and therefore you have really to start from scratch when these families or these women with their children reach your community center. And that's when I was in Syria, we had community centers that were really multitasking and trying to respond to all these needs, to the psychological distress, many times to the PTSD, depression, and anxieties that we would see in women, but also to the educational needs and developmental needs of their children. And this is the norm, like this is what was more common. But then you will have some smaller groups of children that had already developmental disability or delays in their development, or cognitive disability that was exacerbated by the fact that they were not receiving no education, they were not receiving positive parenting and care, they were not growing up in a safe environment. And these children in a place like Montreal or in Panama, they will probably be able to receive the support to reach their potential, to improve their situation to the maximum possible, taking into account their condition. But in a place like Syria or any conflict area where the services are not available, these children are doomed, because if they don't receive the services and the care,
Yes.
they will never reach their potential.
Yes, yes. So, I mean, this is all very interesting and very new, I think, to me and to most of our listeners. So can we go back? When you arrive, let's say in Syria, you don't speak Syrian, I imagine, right?
Arabic.
Arabic.
When I arrived, I was speaking a few words. Yeah. Because
Okay.
of the proximity, because I'm from Cyprus, so Syria, we
Yeah.
had already been
Okay.
in contact with Arab speaking people before. Yeah.
Right. Okay. But by and large, you would have difficulty
Yeah.
talking about scientific terms like trauma and depression
Yeah.
and anxiety. I would imagine you speak sort of kitchen Arabic.
True. Yes.
Yes, I'm hungry. I want to sleep. Thank you. So when you arrive, like, how do you first of all put out the word that you're looking for volunteers? How does that happen?
Well, in my role in Syria, I was coordinating a very big team of Arab-speaking people, Syrians.
Oh.
So my role was not, and it was the mission with the organization I joined was there for 10 years already, because they started their presence with Iraq refugee influx back in the Iraqi war.
Right.
So my role was to coordinate, to understand the needs, to improve the services, to build capacity of the staff that was working on the ground. And then as a psychologist, because we trained people in some interventions that have that are evidence-based and can function in all settings, like narrative exposure therapy. The net has been implemented in many places in the world, and in Syria has been really effective as well. So my role would be to train them, always with the support of interpreters, and then supervise them. And the supervision part was the hardest part, because in the clinics we wouldn't have an interpreter. So normally I would sit in and observe my counselors that were doing the therapy, and then another counselor would sit with me and translate to me. By that time, I would catch more words. I would have learned a bit more Arabic. But I mean, there are ways. If you really want to do a good work and quality and provide quality services, you need to be on the ground. Even if in your role as a coordinator, you need to sit in and observe and give feedback and try to support your colleagues. And we would find a way to do it. Yeah.
Would you run up against some resistance? I mean, here's this foreigner telling us what to do.
No, it was really, my team was really embracing everything, because by the time I arrived, they were so tired. Imagine that I'm talking about a team of 50 people who were officers and trainers and working to support the field teams. And then in the field teams, we would have hundreds of people working. Yeah. And these people, 90% of them have been impacted by the conflict. They have been displaced, they've lost people. And at the same time, they were trying to support others. So you can imagine the burden they were having. So
Yes.
they were very happy to receive new tools, to receive new techniques, to get someone next to them to sit and say, let's do this, and get some guidance and supervision. So actually it was very hard for me to leave Syria. I didn't live in my own will, I have to say. It was other conditions that forced me to leave. But after 2.5 years, uh, my team was my family, and I felt that they had embraced me like family. I would have colleagues' mothers sending me Tupperware with food at the office. I would get invitation for the traditional breakfast every Friday from different people. So it was when you get there, of course, you need to go with a very humble
Yes.
and it's so new. You need to learn how. You need to understand how these people have been surviving for so long,
Right.
and what are their needs and their dreams, how young people dreams that have capacity. Syria had the highest alphabetization rate in the whole Arab world. All my team had bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, PhD degrees. They are really high qualified people who had the dream, like many other people in Europe, to travel abroad, to study more in other universities, and they had really no possibility because of the embargo and the difficulty to travel. So you need to be able to take on all that frustration and understand that these people need support as well. They're not only support providers or service
Yeah.
providers, they need to be supported. Yeah.
Sure. Sure. Who heals the healers is the question, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And so you said sometimes in 2 hours, but perhaps in four or perhaps a whole day, you could impart a lot of important information. In a nutshell, what would you tell these grandmothers? What should they do with the refugees?
Well, the three action principles of PFA is
Yes.
to look, listen, and link. Look, listen, link.
Look,
So
listen, link.
yeah,
Okay.
these are the action principles. And when we're talking about look, it means that you observe. You don't just look, but you really observe. You look for people who are most vulnerable, people who might have been injured, people who are very agitated. You look for younger children, for teenagers, for elderly people, people with disabilities. You're trying to identify among the group, the community, you're trying to help who has the most urgent needs. Yeah. And then with listen, we're talking about active and empathic listening, because we are trying not to do therapy. This is not a therapy intervention, but it's identifying the need and trying to respond most adequately to this need. So when we talk about listen, we are really trying to understand from a very specific conversation where we are trying to collect basic information. We are not trying to do a debriefing. We're not trying to go into the details of what happened. No, we're just trying to understand what are the basic needs and really listen and try to find the solution to the person or to these people we're trying to help. And then with link, we're referring to linking people to the adequate services available. And in every emergency, normally you would have different agencies or different organizations or the civil society coming in to provide help. And that's the most difficult part, to have a clear understanding and mapping of the services, of who is doing what and when and where, so that you can link people to these services. And when you're doing a referral, you're trying to link, it needs to be a sensitive referral, a referral that is not victimizing, the putting at risk the person, and a referral that ensures that the person reaches and receives the service, which is sometimes very complicated in an emergency setting. And then, of course, the basic needs that can be covered at the moment by the PFA provider would be water, something warm or something to cool them down depending on the situation, ensuring that people who have lost their family members or their children are brought back together with their family. Children who are alone, they are brought together and put in a safe environment to avoid any other harm. So these are the basics. Mm.
Very logical and very beneficial, I'm sure. So speaking of the children, what have you observed in terms of delayed development and personality and health problems in these children?
Well, the impact depending on it depends a lot on the time of the event. You know, as developmental perspective, we know that different milestones are reached in different time in our development, and it really depends also on the response and the recovery. So if a child is impacted, for example, at the age of 5, and there is a regression to previous developmental stages, then if this child reaches a safe place and receives services and support and lives in a loving environment, then more or less easily they can recover and go on and ahead with their development. The problem is mostly when conflict and emergencies are protracted, and not only in conflict, but also in developing countries or countries that are for years under poverty or continuous internal conflict, like, for example, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the eastern part, places where schooling is not available, children are not in a safe environment. They are, you see things that you shouldn't see in this world. Like you see children growing up on the side of the streets with no parents around, and they're on a survival mode.
Yeah.
That's not thriving. That's just surviving.
Mm.
You can imagine, what the future of these children could be.
Yes.
It's not long, for sure. It's not long.
No.
And so, yeah, I think that you can see impact on their language, on their learning skills, on their cognitive capacities, physical impact. We know that that exposure to stress for a long time can be really toxic and can result to health issues like diabetes in an elderly. When you get older, diabetes, even types of cancer have been linked to chronic exposure to stress. So there are so many different impacts depending on the developmental stage that the child is exposed and the time, the duration of the exposure to the stress.
Well, another thing that I read in your biography is that you have trained as a narrative exposure therapist for PTSD. And can you tell me a little bit about that? What is that? What does it involve? What do you do?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be trained with the people who developed the nets some decades ago, with Thomas Elbert and Maggie Schauer and Elizabeth Kaiser. And I did my PhD in the University of Konstanz, where it still holds the outpatient clinic for asylum seekers.
Yeah.
And the NET is a beautiful and really humanitarian approach to PTSD. It considers that it needs to be brief, so we work we do exposure, narrative exposure to specific traumatic experiences that the person has identified in their life. We start with the lifeline, and the person is leading each session and deciding and placing the traumatic events in their lifetime, the entire lifetime, from the first event they remember. And then we also place flowers in this symbolic lifeline to identify the positive and resources and the people that have been involved in their lifetime that have supported them. And then the exposure sessions work, they're very guided but empathic, in a way that the person is led through the traumatic event in a way that they feel really accompanied, and they are encouraged to overcome the fear and the avoidance that is involved in PTSD when talking about the event. And normally you would see, you walk them through the event, and you would use all the elements that are included in a life experience, which would be the cognitive cognitive or the physiological part, the cognitive senses and the understanding of the event, and then the physiology, the physical arousal that comes with the event, and then what you try to do is to connect the different elements of the event, what we call the cold memory, which is what happened, where it happened, what were you able to see and observe, with what was happening in you. So what was the emotional reaction, the physiological reaction. And by connecting these two cold and hot memory, as it's called, we manage that the person has a recollection of the event in a more structured way in their mind, that they can talk about the event and they get habituated and they don't feel aroused anymore once this happens. And for people with complex trauma, which means that they have experienced many types of events in many occasions in their lives, this is very beneficial because trauma is a memory. It works and impacts the memory in a way that many times one single event can be confused with many other events of a similar nature, and the person is all the time in an effort of avoiding any memory that brings back those events. By doing this, we structure and we put an order in the events, and the person gets to write. When we are doing the narrative exposure therapy, we are writing the narration as an autobiography for the person to receive this at the end and decide what they would do with their life story.
When you say we are writing, who is writing?
So the therapist or a co-therapist is writing everything that the person is saying in the first person. So Andrea, when I was 5 years old, I had a bike accident and this and this and this happened in detail of what had happened. And then we put all the events in the life story, in the biography of the person in the right order, so that the person doesn't have that confusion anymore. And NET has a lot of evidence around it. There are many studies that support that is one of the evidence-based interventions for PTSD, along with CBT or trauma-focused CBT or EMDR. And what is nice about, what I like about the NET is can be used at any place. It has been used in Africa, of course, in many countries in Europe, even in Canada. There is a group that is being working and has been trained in this, in Arab countries like Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and people from any language and culture can be trained, and with a little bit of supervision, they can implement NET. And I think that's what's very nice about it, that it can be really culturally adapted. And the testimonies, which is these autobiographies that the patients receive, these testimonies have even been used in courts of human rights for people to, or asylum seekers, for people to claim asylum or to have a legal process against those who have tortured them or those who have caused them to flee or who inflicted any type of violence against them.
Amazing. Sounds good. So do you also do that privately or just for UNICEF?
Well, actually, I'm not allowed to be doing it privately because as I'm working for UNICEF, I cannot be right now privately working unless I get a special permission, but my job is not allowing me that extra time. And for UNICEF, we are still trying to find the best way to do that, because it would require a country and a community and an existing service that would demand that would come and say, okay, we are ready to implement this type of service, because we are not working, UNICEF works with partners and with governments. So we need to be integrating whatever we are suggesting and responding to the needs that are identified by the government or the community or the implementing partner in each country. But hopefully soon, that's something that we're discussing, and hopefully we'll be able to implement in this region as well soon.
Well, it sounds like a really good approach, and since there are so many millions of people who suffer of PTSD, I think it's very necessary.
Yeah, I also agree, and it's growing. It's really growing, and many people from different parts of the world, many psychologists and researchers are working really hard to get this exposure of net and yeah.
Mm-hmm. In 2018, you wrote a very interesting paper, which I think the title is Variation in Caesarean Section Rates in Cyprus, Italy, and Iceland, an analysis of the role of the media. So this is a whole new approach, a whole other aspect of you. Tell me about that. Like, what is the effect of the media?
Well, I will tell you about that. Maybe I should just mention that this area of perinatal mental health is really my passion. It was my research. In my research for my PhD, I tried to bring together the trauma and psychosocial support in relation to the perinatal period. And I have been so lucky to be representing my country as a committee member for two cost actions, which are funded, European Union funded projects for the collaboration between researchers and practitioners from different countries in Europe. And both the first cost action was called birth, and this one is called, we are focusing on birth-related trauma. And with these colleagues that you've seen in that paper, but also other colleagues from Spain and other places, we've been working and researching in this area. And actually, before that paper, we published with Ibone Olza and other colleagues, we published a paper on the psychological experience of physiological birth without any intervention. We did a literature review of existing testimonies of qualitative studies of women talking about how empowering an experience of physiological birth can be without any intervention. And that was, I think, the nicest research I've done, because it was, for me as a woman as well, empowering to see that if we manage to have non-medicalized care and treat birth as a physiological experience, it can be so empowering for women. This paper, I'm from Cyprus, and probably you don't know this, but Cyprus has the highest rate of cesarean sections in Europe, and one of the top 3 highest in the world.
Really? Higher than South America?
60% of births in Cyprus are cesareans.
Okay.
And yeah, we wanted to see with these colleagues from the different countries what would be the impact of media as a source of communicating and educating people many times in these cesarean sections. And we were able to see that the way that media communicates anything related to labor, birth, pregnancy, breastfeeding has really an impact on the decision making that women take as well. On if they want a cesarean or physiological birth. But it's so complex that this is only one aspect, the media impact. Then you have the impact of education of doctors, nurses, midwives.
Right.
And I was teaching perinatal psychology for midwifery masters in Cyprus. And our midwives who were already doing their training, they would tell us horrible stories of how they would be treated by gynecologists in their practice, because they were the ones that, they should be making all the decisions, and many times against what the woman would want, and many times breaking their oath to Hippocrates and not giving them all the information they would need to take an informed decision. And this is really bad because, when you have an invasive birth against your will, you are traumatized. In most of the case, most of the case, you will suffer obstetric violence, which will lead to postnatal depression or postnatal PTSD. It will affect the way you interact and connect with your baby. It has detrimental impact in your life as a mother, but also in the development of your child. So this is something that I am advocating for, me and many, many other colleagues from these cost actions, and there is urgent need to do something about it, because the medical world has this patriarchy embedded in it when it comes to women's health, and it's horrible.
I totally agree. When I was an intern Um, I I actually delivered 26 babies, and I was seriously thinking of becoming an obstetrician. Although up to that time I was thinking of becoming a psychiatrist, but then certain things happened that sort of made me think that perhaps I would be better off as an obstetrician. And I absolutely hated the way the obstetricians were treating women. I could not stand the way they were talking to them and yelling at them, push, push, push,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And so that's when I changed my mind and became a psychiatrist. So I totally agree with you. Um, I think the attitude of obstetricians and nurses assisting obstetricians, it's the same thing. Some of them are just as bad as the obstetricians. They have sort of bought into the same kind of mentality. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in
It's
terms of
really sad. But I'm sure you would have made a very good obstetrician if you're saying that.
probably. Well, anyway, in terms of you, was there anything in your own background that sort of made made you become interested in this whole subject that we have been talking about? Helping people who are in distress and helping women have better births. Anything in your own background?
Well, in my background, personally, in terms of helping women, I think helping in general has always been a calling for me. Since a very young child, I was getting into trouble, I remember in school, because I would stand up and defend my classmates that were not being treated well. I remember very clearly, I had a classmate that she had developmental delay and cognitive disability, and she was abused and maltreated by our teacher bluntly in front of the whole class, until one day he grabbed her from the hair and threw her out of the class. And I got up. I was so angry. I took in Cyprus, I don't know, back then they had this long
Yes,
ruler, and
rulers.
the
Yes,
ones that are
yes,
the ones that are
yeah,
made out of wood.
yes,
And I
yes.
was so angry. I completely lost it, and I took the ruler and started hitting our teacher on the back until I broke the ruler.
How old were you?
I think I was 11.
Wonderful, wonderful,
I don't know if it's wonderful. They called my
wonderful.
parents and my dad when he came, because he always used to defend my rebellious character,
Yes.
because I took it from him probably. So when he came, he said, "What are you calling me for? If I was there, I would have done the same. You should expel this teacher." So I don't know. I think I have this feeling of what is just and unjust, and I cannot stand it. It makes me furious, which is something I try to contain and not keep using a ruler against people, but maybe becoming an advocate or becoming as educated in a position that I can make a change. It was the way to do it, but it still impacts me a lot. So when the refugee crisis started, and I come from a family of refugees. My great grandfather was expelled from Izmir with the problems with in 1922, when the problems between Turkey and Greece the first time happened, and many Greeks were expelled.
Yeah.
I never met him, but I heard stories about him and the way he came. He lost his mom. He came only with his dad. He had a very interesting story, and people who knew him always talked to me about him. I felt that I knew him without ever meeting him. But I think that kind of stories are embedded in our DNA as well. I always felt that becoming a refugee is one of the worst things that can happen to you, because you are leaving everything behind without you will. You are forced to live your life and start
Excuse me
from scratch.
for 1 second. I need to take this. Hello? Yes, it is. Yes. I'm terribly sorry.
No
Sorry
worries.
about that. No. So what was the last thing you were saying? Yes, about your parents and your father. Well, he was lucky he was not Armenian.
My great grandfather,
Your
yeah, he
great
was another
grandfather.
Armenian. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I was saying that this is something that when the refugee crisis started, and I would see these horrible images of refugees coming into Greece and from a place so close to us, from Syria, it's just across the sea. We could, when I was in Syria, I could, when we were going with the car towards Damascus, I would hear Cyprus radio. It's that close.
Mm,
So I felt like I was back then working at the university teaching, and I felt like this is not where I should be right now.
mhm,
That's when I decided to go. And the same applies for obstetric violence and women's right in birth and women's right in general. It's just that I was involved more in research and I took testimonies of women that have refugee women experiencing obstetric violence in a country other than their own where they don't speak the language and they're so vulnerable. And for me, I always question the medical world and doctors and nurses, anyone involved in patient care. How can we improve and humanitize the way we are treating patients? How is it possible that a patient, which is in Greek, the word patient is asthenis, which means a person without strength. That's what the word means.
mhm.
So I was always telling my medical students when I was teaching them medical psychology, I was telling them, you cannot, when you're treating a patient, because this patient doesn't have strength, you have to remember that's what patient means. The first thing you need to do as a good doctor you want to be is to give them the strength, is to find ways that you empower them and you make them feel stronger than what they are. So I'm really worried. I'm extremely worried how the medical world and certain professionals, of course, not everyone, and I hope that it's only a minority of health professionals, are, doing the contrary, are taking advantage of their position of power to disempower and to put patients in a worse conditions than when they come.
Mhm. Do you have children?
No, I have dogs and cats, and I don't have children yet, and I'm not sure if I want to have.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me about the three most influential people in your life
Wow. Ah, okay. The most influential
and how
people.
they impacted your life. You know how they changed it, if at all?
Well, I think the most influential people in our life, if we take all our life, it's our
Yes.
parents.
Okay.
And I have both my parents still alive, and they have both impacted me in different ways. They've both taught me things, mostly by their way of being, their mentality and personality, um, and by observing things that I could be taking from them and things I shouldn't be taking from,
Yes.
which has been a lesson for me, has been a
Mhm,
process, and it's very interesting. Apart from that, I think my professors from University of
mhm,
Konstanz, I consider Thomas Elbert one of the most intelligent and empathic and supportive professors anyone could have. He actually has won many times, I think, the prize of German best mentor or something. And I feel very, very lucky that I was able to know him and be supervised by him.
right.
And also, yeah, other colleagues that I've met on the way, like Ibone Olza. Ibone is a perinatal psychiatrist and neonatal psychiatrist and perinatal psychiatrist, and she's a huge advocate for women's rights. And
Mhm,
she always supported women, even in lawsuits against doctors in cases of obstetric violence. And I really admire her passion and dedication to this. But there are so many. If I start thinking, there
mhm,
are so many people I had the fortune to cross paths with and learn from them.
mm. So if you could have if you could have coffee with any historical figure, anybody in the past, who would it be?
Oh, wow. I think Bob Marley.
Really? Okay, that's a new one. Okay.
Bob Marley, because I've recently been in Jamaica and I
Uh,
used to love his music as a teenager. And when I was
uh,
in Jamaica, I went back into his philosophy and life examples, and I visited his museum. And I feel that the love that he had for his people, the love that he had for all people and creatures, and the way he wanted to fight for unity as a way of bringing peace in his country. Apart from him being a great musician, I think it's I would love to have and sit and have a coffee with him and meet him. And another person that I would be only one. I could only have
well,
one.
it's okay. Let's add another one. Sure. Take another one.
Another person I would love to meet is probably Freud.
Okay, that could be interesting as long as you don't
But
mind cigar smoke.
yeah, no, because I would love to understand better. And I mean, I'm not a Freudian, I'm not a psychoanalyst, and but I find I wanted to discuss with him and learn from him. There are many things that he said and did that I'm not, you know,
In
I'm
agreement with.
in agreement with, but
Yeah,
still I feel that
right.
he would be an interesting person to talk with.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, that's how I became a psychiatrist. At the age of 13, I read Freud's interpretation of dreams in Vienna, in German.
Wow.
And when I read that, I said, that's for me. I love the way this guy's mind works.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he was a pioneer for
he
sure, and he was a
definitely,
brilliant mind
definitely,
for his time.
definitely was. Um, what what was the most fun trip that you have ever taken?
Oh, fun trip. I
Yeah.
think the most reckless and fun trip, and I say reckless because it was a time where I still hadn't realized how tough life can be. I was very young. I was 25 or 26, and I had come to Peru to do
Hmm.
my research.
Hmm.
And after 6 months of interviewing women and hearing really horrible stories, I decided to take a few months off to take care of myself. And I was backpacking in Latin America, most of the time alone and meeting great people
Hmm.
and visiting places that are amazing, like the Salar of Uyuni in Bolivia, Machu Picchu, then crossing to Ecuador, and then taking a bus of 29 hours from Quito to Medellin,
Yes.
reaching the Caribbean and seeing these things for the very first time with a young eye and an open heart. It was really, really amazing.
Mm. So going back to that trip, what did you learn about yourself during that trip?
Um, I think I confirmed because I always felt I was very independent and very adventurous. I would say yes to everything, almost everything. I felt that I was empowered as a woman traveling alone in Latin America and crossing borders that people would say, oh, that border is very risky and there's a lot of drug trafficking and I would do it and it was okay. Maybe I had to be a bit alert, but then I would do it and then traveling and meeting people from nowhere, like new people. I made a very nice friend. He's Australian, and we met in a bus, and then we ended up doing, popping from beach to beach and getting to know parts of Colombia together, and then meeting another person that with people that so many years ago I still have contact, and I met their children, and just for spending a few days together in a new experience for both was enough to keep this relationship. And I think what I really like is that we don't what I learned is that we need to trust the world. We need to trust people and the good in people. Of course there is a lot of bad people out there that could cause harm, but I don't want as human beings to lose the trust in other people, because that would be very sad. It would be living alone in a world where you see the world as a dangerous place, and it shouldn't be like that.
What would you like to be most remembered for?
I think of being kind.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be remembered as a kind person, a person that was always avoiding to do harm and always trying to help. That's it.
I think that should not be too difficult. Just
Well,
listening to you and being with you, I don't think that anybody would come to a different conclusion about you. My last question, which I ask all my guests, is what does being human mean to you?
oof.
I know it's a bit difficult, but take your time.
It's difficult, you know what? Because if you had asked me this 10 years ago, I would have
Yes,
said something very easy and
yes,
but now, as I told you,
yes,
I have seen pain, I have seen suffering,
yes,
and it's hard for me to say what human being is. For me, it can be the most wonderful and beneficial creature on earth that can make the best change in everyone's life and the world. And at the same time, it can be the worst, most dangerous creature on this earth. So it's sad, but this is the faces of us, the same coin.
yes, yes,
And I just hope, I'm not sure yet, but I hope that it is the most prevailing and most frequent phase that we will meet in the world is the positive side, it's the beneficial side of humans. Mm.
yes, very well said. Well, you have given us a lot to think about. Thank you for being so generous with your time and your knowledge. Uh, Thank you, Dr. Spyridou, for a most stimulating and informative discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being with you, and the time passed by very
Yes,
fast.
yes. I just want to say something about next week's program. My guest next week will be Dr. Bob Rosenberg, who received his PhD in the history of science and technology from Johns Hopkins University. He spent 2 decades at Rutgers University and then spent some time at John Wiley and Sons. He's the author. He has contributed chapters to 2 books, Irreducible Mind and Beyond Physicalism. He will discuss with me precognition, which confounds our sense and understanding of time. Please tune in. And friends, be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. So a little bit of advertising there. Thank you, Andrea.
Great.
That was really fun, and wish you good luck in all your enterprises, whatever you do.
Thank you, Thomas. Very nice being with you. Thanks. Take
Thank
care.
you. Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.